Some of you have heard from today's speaker, who was featured at the ICEA Canada Chapter's 2019 workshop and was very well received by those who were fortunate enough to hear him. Jonathan Shriqui is here from the Canadian Department of Defense, and to make sure we don't get any further off schedule, I'm going to pass it right on over to him. Jonathan?
Thank you, Megan. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in such great numbers. It's truly an opportunity to be a presenter for ICEA, let alone to be a repeat presenter. I do got quite the presentation for you this afternoon, so without any further ado, we shall begin. So first of all, let me start by presenting myself. My name is Jonathan Shriqui. My background is mainly in financial management, project controls. Start off my career with General Electric. Then I moved on with Lockheed Martin as a finance planning and analysis, BMT. Now I finally work as a project control management specialist for the Department of National Defense. So scheduling, let's start with what a schedule is not. A schedule is not a checklist. A checklist is something you do when you go to the grocery store. You know, you need to get bananas, you need to go get sugar, flour if you want to make a cake, right? A schedule, you need to take those items and put them in a very discrete manner so you can achieve your project or make your cake, right? So a schedule it's a system which integrates logically that work, and it's not just integrating the work logically, but it's also putting cost and resources to it to make it really effective. Another thing to understand is a schedule is not a static document. It's a living, breathing, and most importantly, a very dynamic document. That's a key feature for a schedule. It needs to have the ability to react to what's actually going on in the progress. So if there's delays, your schedule has to push out. If things get accomplished early, your final milestone needs to get pushed in. There needs to be that element of being dynamic. It's the focal point of project program management, right? To me, the schedule is really, it's the heart, it's the key artifact of any project. For a lot of you who are out there, it's also, you know, I see a lot to do with cost estimating. We all know cost is a function of time, so it's very important to understand that. But more importantly, if you're a program manager or a project manager, it's how you're going to know when to leverage certain risk, either mitigation or enhancement strategies, right? You have to have that resource that enables you to take those decisions. If you're in a situation like for example for D&D where we engage with contractors on large projects, and we have most of our projects, or a lot of the bigger projects, will have a component of relational contracting. Well, how to establish, and a function of that is joint governance. If your schedule is not transparent, it's not credible, if it's doesn't have integrity, it's going to be really hard to have that joint governance. So it's really important that a schedule is really the focal point of your project. Additionally, it's the foundation of earned value management, which is my area of expertise. And I've met a lot of people, I don't want to take too long on EVM, but I'm going to take a little bit of time. I've met a lot of people who says, you know what, EVM doesn't really work. I said, okay, and I go look at the schedule, and the schedule's not that good, and then suddenly all their EVM metrics are red. Well, EVM did its job, it's just you have a bad schedule. So much of EVM depends on how good that schedule is. So it's really important to have a good foundation when you start your project, and that's what your schedule is going to give to you. So to give an illustration of the difference between a checklist and a schedule, and this is taken from an actual the actual same project. The image that you have on the left it is a schedule, but it's actually more of a checklist. You can see that there's a lot of broken logic, things are missing. Just looking at it from a bird's eye view, this is a very big project. And then you look at the image on the right, it has more that traditional feel of what a schedule looks like. What we're going to cover today is what kind of things we can do to make sure that we end up with a schedule that looks like something on the right versus something that looks like on the left. So first thing we got to understand about a schedule is that it has two key architectures to it. So the first one is what we call the integrated master plan. That's something that, you know, people that are very senior level to the leadership level, your project sponsor, they're going to be very interested about. So it's more about, you know, it's an event-based plan, how things should get done. So if we think of the concept, if we think of a project of building a car, one of the key milestones of building that car, one of the key events is going to be, is testing complete? Is testing complete for the car? One of the significant accomplishments to saying that testing is complete is that we've accomplished all our road tests. And the criteria to determine if all our road tests are done, or we're going to do various tests. We're going to have an acceleration test, a braking test, maybe a rolling over test. I don't know, but I'm sure that by now you understand the concept of what is an integrated master plan. Lower, and then the second view is what we call the work breakdown structure. That's where the team is going to want to look at. That's your deliverable based. It's the what of the project. So then that's what we're typically going to look at. It's the systems of a project, right? So you're going to have your frame, your engine, the transmission, the body. So it's when we link the integrated master plan to your to the work breakdown structure, that's where we're going to get a really good schedule. Another thing that's important to understand is most of the time, a lot of organizations are going to put an emphasis on building a schedule that's using the WBS as the primary architecture for a schedule. That's not a hard written rule. You can have the IMP that's being based as the primary architecture for the schedule. And to give a better example of what I'm trying to say, is we got this image here. So we can see that on the left, we have the WBS, it's the what. And on the top, we have the IMP that represents the how, right? So your milestones that we talked about that are events, criterias, or significant accomplishments, they're all going to line up. They're going to line up to a culmination of, you know, we've accomplished a specific task for a WBS item that allows me to say I've accomplished this milestone. It's always important to have these two views because the person who's the actual scheduler, they're going to be very focused most of the time on what the WBS is. But leadership is going to be more focused on the how. You know, that you're not going to see a senior leader who's going to go in, if you have a large project like we have in defense, you know, several thousand lines. They're not going to want to see that. They want to see, you know, high level, where am I going? What, you know, what do the dates for my milestone look like? So it's important to keep this IMS architecture in mind. So what are the basic building blocks of a schedule? So you're going to have your project milestones. You're going to have scheduling tasks. Tasks are the lowest level in the schedule. So multiple tasks, typically multiple tasks will roll up to a work package. A work package will roll up to a control account, and multiple control accounts will work up to a WBS element. The other thing that you should always have in your schedule is internal resources and external resources. So things like labor, the material, your subcontractor costs and timing, all that stuff needs to get integrated into your schedule. And that's really important. And I got slides later on that are going to depict why that's important. But it's one of my pet peeves when I get a schedule and there's no resources into it. The other thing that you always need to have is the durations, right, of a task. Milestones by definition don't have durations. They're the accomplishment of multiple tasks. So how long is something going to take to do? Next, we get into logic relationships. So how do the different scheduling tasks come together, right? That's going to get, and there's four main types of relationship, and we'll get to those later, because those can have a significant impact on the integrity and credibility of your schedule. Another common element that we find are constraints. So we have hard constraints and soft constraints. Those are things that can affect also the ability of your schedule to be dynamic, and we'll get through also. I just wanted to go through these so that people can have a basic understanding of what the key elements are required to make a schedule. Next thing we got to look at is the concept of schedule duality. I find a lot of people often overlook this, and it's critical, especially if you're doing earned value management. It's very important. So initially, you're gonna want to have to create a schedule, and then you're gonna have to baseline that schedule. What does that mean to baseline? Baseline, that becomes the line in the sand that you're going to start measuring yourself against. So typically what happens when either, if you're an industry, or if you're within an organization who's hiring a contractor, so for D&D and we're hiring industry to help us with the project, there's going to be a time of period when we go from contract award or project kickoff, where the initial schedule is going to be in a state of flux. We're going to develop it, but at some point we have to snap the baseline and we say, this is the schedule that we will be measuring ourselves against. And that needs to be done very early on in the project. I would say 60 within 100 days of contract award. I often get pushback when I say that. And to me, it's very important, because if you take on a significant project, whether it's internal to your organization or your government taking on a project, if you can't snap a baseline schedule really quickly, what were you thinking when you bid on this, right? That's the big question. So there's always two outcomes to there. Is either there is a schedule and people don't want to share it for X, Y reasons. Maybe they forgot something, they got an estimate wrong, or even worse, there was no plan when they went to get the contract. So it's very important to have that level of accountability very early on in the project to say, what were you thinking, right? I would almost want to think also that a very preliminary schedule would be a requirement to submit for a bid. It needs to include all the scope of work. There's many schools of thought if the management activities, such as people who are schedulers, people that aren't working towards active deliverables should be in the schedule or not. Personally, I think it makes a lot more sense to have everything in the schedule, especially when you're doing EVM, because when you cost up all the scope and you add up feet, you should be able to reconcile to target cost. So it just makes things more simple, more transparent if you put all the scope in the schedule. Your baseline needs to be under strict configuration control. You don't get to change the baseline whenever you want. Short of a major change in execution strategy, or that there's a change in scope, the baseline shouldn't change that much. What does that mean exactly? So I'm not saying that, if in between two milestones, we realize we want to execute things differently, that's fine. But we shouldn't be just changing the dates of milestones just because we realize, like, wow, we underestimated the effort that this was going to take. No, we have to learn to accept what the metrics tell us, and we need, sometimes we don't want to accept it, but it happens. Poor performance happens, but having that visibility, that transparency, and acting upon it is way more valuable than just trying to rebaseline and rebaseline and rebaseline all the time. The schedule the baseline needs to be accepted by the customer and the contractor. So before I talked about relational contracting and joint governance, that's exactly what I mean. There needs to be accountability on both ends, that this is what we're driving to, right? Again, it's the foundation for EVM, and we need to have contractual reasons why you want to change the baseline. You just don't change the baseline at a whim. The forecast schedule is, that's where you're going to capture your performance. How are we doing, right? The only thing that's going to differentiate your baseline schedule to your forecast schedule is going to be the forecast, like the dates and the resources to achieve the estimate at complete. Other than that, the two schedules should be exactly the same. The relationship, the logic, the constraints, everything between the two should be the same. So that's very, very important concept here. Then another thing to know, to check your schedule against there, what we call the generally accepted scheduling principles. We got a couple up here, but my personal favorite is the ability of the schedule to be predictive, right? How do we know we have a meaningful critical path? How do we know that the forecast is accurate and it drives us through the entire project? I view that specific principle as, you know, that it implies that the schedule is going to be dynamic. It has to have that ability to flow either way. Yep. So I promised you guys tell you how are we going to assess a schedule. And last year I started this presentation by saying, you know, and I probably should have started this one by saying this. My strong point is EVM. I'm very knowledgeable with scheduling. I might say I have some experience, but considering my audience, who a lot of them are ICEA members and focused on cost, and in cost, when we do costing, we love data. We love data analytics, and the tests that I'm going to show you today are a great way to put objectivity and data analytics to a schedule. So if you look in industry, you're going to notice there's 3 big assessments out there. You got the DCMA 14-point. We got the U.S. Government Accountability Office. They have an 11-point, and NASA has a 15-point. Personally, I prefer the DCMA version, not because I'm in the defense industry, but because I find that the criteria for how the metrics are done are very sharp. They're not open to interpretation, and they lend themselves well for data trending very well. So that's why I decided to talk about this one today. So the point of the DCMA test, right, is to find potential logic problems within your schedule. So it doesn't look at anything. So it's only looking at tasks that are forward. We don't look backwards. We don't look at tasks that are based on level of effort. We don't look at milestones or summary tasks. So we're looking at discrete tasks only. So things like, you know, I need to weld this, I need to grind this, very discrete tasks, which should be the driving factor in your schedules, those tasks that are related to deliverables, right? When we go through this, I've met some people, you know, it's very tempting to say, we could put this in a contract and, you know, pass or fail type mentality. That's not the purpose of this test, and I don't recommend anyone to be harsh with their contractor because they either fail this or praise them because they met it. The whole point of this test is to drive discussion and comprehension. Like, you know, is our schedule at a first glance, is it holistically okay, right? And if we look at the metrics and it's not, why? What are the problems? Is me the client? Are we doing something? Do you have a problem with internal? Are you lacking resources, right? So it's to try to drive, to have that discussion, find out why your schedule can't comply to these tests. I'm going to caveat that note with one thing. At the initial baseline review or at the initial kickoff meeting, if the schedule cannot meet these tests, I would argue that you're proceeding at risk. If the initial vision for the project, the logic isn't good, odds are it'll never get there through the implementation or as you execute your project, right? This test is very well known in industry. There are many tools, including Primavera and Deltek. They have it built, pre-built into the tool itself. There are many MS Project add-ons that will do the test for you as well. So this is not just something, I know there's many industries outside of defense that use it. It's the de facto, I would say, schedule sniff test if you want. And there's the link at the bottom if you guys want to go check it out. In all sincerity, the DCMA has moved on to a different, I think it was mid-2019, they moved on to a different point assessment test. Instead of 14 points, I think they're down to 7 points. But personally, I still like looking at all 14 because I'm a big believer in data analytics. and you can never have too much data. So the DCMA 14-point test, it's good, but it's definitely not perfect also. It doesn't account for running a full schedule risk analysis. We'll get to what that is a little bit later. It doesn't take into account how many near critical paths you have. So in a project, a critical path is, what's the longest path it takes to get from beginning to end. Or it gets a little tricky in some schedules, is you may have a critical path. Sometimes you can even have 2 or 3, but you can have many tasks that are, if they slip even by a day, whoops, they get onto the critical path. So those need to be taken into account too, and this test doesn't do that. What else is important? It doesn't look if you have tasks that don't have a defined duration. If tasks are not associated with the baseline, so the 4th one from the bottom, that's very important. Relationship ratios. If one task is associated to 50 tasks other, maybe there's missing. Maybe the schedule needs to be broken down a little bit more. How many numbers of tasks in parallel? Anyways, we could find many more to this. What I'm trying to say is this schedule is good. There are other tools out there, but it's not perfect, but it's a pretty good tool. So the pros, right? It's having a compliance schedule is going to allow your schedule to be more dynamic. It's going to allow you to present a more viable critical path. It's going to have a higher level of integrity. And that's very important, and we're going to build on that a little bit later. It's going to enable you to make a better use of schedule risk assessment tools, such as running simulations or Monte Carlos. You're going to have a reduction in unforeseen schedule slippage because your schedule has to be built a certain way, and you can run better what-if scenarios. The disadvantages, you will have a schedule that's slightly larger, just because you're asking for that extra level of transparency. The bigger ones is the next one. It may require your organization or the organization that you're contracting with to change their scheduling practices and their culture. So that could be very difficult to accomplish. But in the past, I've seen that it has brought success to organizations that didn't necessarily adhere to this. And I put greater stakeholder engagement as a disadvantage. To be honest, it could have gone in out of the pros or the cons. What I mean by greater stakeholder engagement is that in order to do this, more people need to get involved. Especially if you're changing the culture, you need to get maybe better tools. More people need to be on board to make it work. Something we need to attack right now is also the concept of integrity versus credibility, right? So schedule integrity has to do with respecting the general accepted scheduling principles, right? And to me, the biggest result of that is your schedule dynamic? So if in a current period, for XY reason, something went wrong and something got delayed, do my milestones push out accordingly, right? We want to see that. Now that could be fixed by putting in mitigation plans, but initially we want to see, is the schedule dynamic? Does it move? Does it react to the progress or risks that have realized themselves, right? Schedule credibility, it has to do with how realistic are the forecasted milestone dates, right? So you telling me the project's going to end the 31st of December. Okay, well, how can I trust that? Well, the way we can do that is by running an SRA, which includes running a Monte Carlo assessment. One thing, you cannot have credibility if you do not have the integrity. It's like trying to run before you can walk. It just doesn't work that way. You need a schedule that's built properly so that you can do the credibility tests after. So just to be clear, the DCMA 14-point test has a lot to do with integrity, and which will help you later on get to credibility. So what is a schedule risk assessment? What do I mean by that? So this is, for those of you who haven't seen this, it's when we do the Monte Carlo simulations. It's where we say, the project is going to end on December 31st, and I have an 85% level of confidence that I'm going to end on that. When we run that through the typical tools, something else we get out of that tool is what we call a sensitivity analysis or a tornado graph. And those tells us which activities in the schedule will have the most impact on our schedule if they are delayed. So this, saying that like I have an 85% chance of finishing on this date, it sounds great. If you're a project manager and you got to report to a senior level, that can drive a lot of confidence. But in order to do that, in order to have that credibility, if you don't have the integrity that your schedule is properly built, you can still run a Monte Carlo assessment, but like the expression says, garbage in, garbage out. So if you have bad integrity, what's going to happen? You're going to run the Monte Carlo simulation. It's going to take your tool much longer to run through the thousands of simulations you're going to ask for it, and the result is probably not going to be really real, right? So you have to have that's why, for our D&D folks, I would say it's important that when you ask for a schedule as part of the project deliverable, it's not just, I want a schedule. We have to specifically ask how we want the schedule to be built so we can run schedules independently through a Monte Carlo simulation. But if the schedule doesn't come delivered in that fashion in the first place, it's going to be difficult to try to do a Monte Carlo simulation or what we call 3-point estimates. So what are we going to look at in DCMA 14 point? I'm looking at the time. Okay, we got 14 tests. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them. There is a slide for each of them. So if we don't get through them today, you can take the slide home with you at home and you can review it. And there's a whole bunch of links at the end where you can get a much more information. The purpose of what I'm trying to do is just to give you a feel for what tests, what they cover, and how it brings more credibility, more integrity to a schedule, so that you can you can run it through a tool and have a sense of how credible it is. So the first test we look at is there missing logic between two tasks, right? So a schedule, as we know, you got task A, task B, and if task A is late, it should push out task B. But if there's no relationship there, what could end up happening is task A gets delayed, but the successor task doesn't move out. So we're not going to have a good sense of where we're going, right? And so without that logic, we don't have a schedule anymore. We have something that I colloquially call a checklist, right? So the rule of thumb is that 95% of your schedule should have some kind of logic to it. And again, the values that the DCMA put, they're not meant to be pass or fail. They're meant to drive discussions. They're more guidelines, but they do have value to it. The next thing we want to look at is leads, right? So sometimes what we like to do is we like to put we can say task B can start before task A. Okay, you could do that depending on what it is. There's some risk in doing that because it implies the biggest question that comes to mind is, do you have the resources for that overlap that's going to happen? Is it even technically feasible, right? Can you build before the design is complete? I'm sure I'm not the first person to bring up that concept, right? So that's why we want to look at the leads. And again, it's saying 95% of your schedule shouldn't have any leads. So this just goes to show it's the rigor of which the schedule needs to be built with. Actually, all the tests, that's the purpose. So lag shows, so well, how much delay do I have between finishing one task and the next one? So the most common example people use, if you go to a PMP course or a scheduling course, they're going to say, well, I'm going to put a lag. I've poured my concrete, and then I'm going to put a lag before I can go build. I would argue that instead of putting a lag, put a task that says, the concrete must cure, because depending where you are, rain, humidity, there's many other factors that can affect how long the curing process can take. And although I'm not an engineer, I'm sure there's some discipline of engineering that can assess when concrete is ready to be built upon or not, right? So you could build that into your schedule. Okay, relationship types, another good one. So the most commonly used relationship type to link scheduled tasks is going to be your finish to start task, which is the most logical one, the most intuitive one people understand. When I finish task A, I can start task B, okay? Now there are other ones. So we got relationships that we got finish to finish, which means that task B can only finish once task A is done. Okay, that can happen from time to time. Same thing with the reverse start to start, so that my task B can only start when my predecessors start. But then we have the start to finish, which quite honestly, I've never really understood it. I don't understand why you would use it. I've talked with some professionals. There's maybe like a very small handful of instances that you could use it. But rule of thumb of all the people who I trust is basically you shouldn't use it. So that's my advice. I follow the people I trust. And the rule here at the DCMA is that 90% of your schedule should be built with finish to start relationships. And I want you to think about that a little bit, right? If we try to run a schedule through a Monte Carlo or a simulation like 1,000 times, these tools are built with people who have PhDs in stats and math. They're very bright people. But in order for it to work, they're making assumptions. So if 50% of your schedule is built with start to finish, your Monte Carlo simulation, it's not going to work. The logic is not going to work in the schedule. So in order to maximize, the utility of trying to run a probabilistic analysis, the schedule needs to be mostly done with, I'm done task A, I can start task B. And that will help the tool work better. It also increases the level of transparency between, if you're in a contractual situation, between both parties, right? Having a schedule that has a really complex logic doesn't make it easy for either side to understand what's going on. So having a logic that's more simple, having a more simple logic can result in a bigger schedule, but at least people can understand it. So that's really important, especially if you're in a joint governance situation. Schedule constraints. So in scheduling, we have two types of constraints. We have hard constraints and we have soft constraints. So hard constraints are things that are going to tell the schedule, I must start this activity on this date, I must finish on this date. Using hard constraints, that can break the relationship in a schedule. In meaning, so on the screen, you can see task A and task B. If task A gets delayed beyond the red line, task B is going to stay where it is because you're telling the tool, do not let that task slip, right? But depending what you're doing, like that may not be, it doesn't let the schedule be dynamic. Somebody got back to me one time and said, well, you know what? My project is in the Arctic, and once the ice freezes, I'm at a halt. So that's why I put a hard constraint. My response to that was, no, for that specific task, create yourself a different calendar in your scheduling tool and say that by this date, right, if you're not complete, it will push it to the spring. So if your project or whatever you're doing doesn't accomplish the task that it's trying to do by, I don't know when water freezes in the Arctic, let's say December 1st or January 1st. If you're not done by January 1st, what it's going to do, it's going to push that task all the way to the spring and let's say May. So that's a good way to get around it. The only instance I've met of a good hard constraint is when I went to a conference and I met the master scheduler from the NASA for the Mars rover. And in his presentation, he's like, in my case, if we were late, we had to wait 15 years for the planet to be, or 10 years, I forget whatever it is, for like the planet has to be in the right space around the moon or whatever. Like that would be a good example to use a hard constraint, but use them wisely. Then we got soft constraints where it won't break the logic, but then the constraint won't be met. you want to minimize the use of soft constraint as well. So with the DCMA test, the rule is you should have 95% of your schedules shouldn't have hard constraints. Personally, I think there shouldn't be any, and if there is, they need to be very well disclosed, and everyone should have a very good understanding of why and where they are in the schedule. That's critical to understand, so people can know if this milestone is not met, the rest of the schedule is not showing that delay. It's really important to understand that. High float. So what does float do? Float means it's the ability for a task to slip without affecting the critical path, without pushing out the other task. So the rule is a task shouldn't be able to slip 44 days without affecting the critical path. So that means something can't move 2 months. Usually when there's that much float, not all the time, but usually, it means that there's a task that's not identified. Maybe it has something to do with a subcontractor or a subcontractor, but usually there's a reason why you want to do that. And if you don't have that, if you have too much of it, it means your schedule, it's not that it won't be dynamic anymore, but it'll be less dynamic. It won't be as dynamic as it should be. Negative float, I gotta looking at the time, I gotta get going. But negative float, this is a good one. It means that you've actually found a way to create time. You're basically cheating yourself. This usually arises when you use a hard constraint. It's not letting the schedule flow. High duration, I'm gonna go quickly for the rest. High duration, if you have a task that the start date and the end date is a year long, it's very difficult to assess where you're at. You know, how are we doing? Nope. Okay. How are we doing? How are we going to assess performance? So rule of thumb, let's keep it simple and keep the schedule, keep those tasks to 2 days maximum, 2 months maximum, 44 days. Invalid dates, we'll skip that one. Hold on. There we go. Resources, this one. I said before in the beginning, I believe not having resources in your schedule is a pet peeve of mine. You need to have the ability, like how much effort is your schedule going to take? One thing that this test doesn't do, because you have the presence of resources, doesn't mean you have the right or the sufficient resources. So a good example of what I'm trying to say is, I took this from a project that I was working on. And so the red line shows how many people the organization had on it, but the blue line is showing the plan. What was the contractor's plan? So you can clearly see that towards the middle, there's this big giant leap in the blue. They were effectively planning to, to the tune of 200% of the resources they had, which turns out that's going to cause you schedule delays. And this happened because they had constraints in their schedule. So right, by now you see it's all starting to come together. And so this graph gave some really good, led to some really good proactive conversations. Why are we seeing this? How are you going to manage this? And that's the intent of the tool, right? To ask questions, to drive discussion. We're gonna, how much time? Okay, we got, no, perfect. Missed tasks. So this is going to give us an idea of performance, right? How many tasks are late in relationship to the baseline? So it's going to just give you an idea. It's not like the SPI in EVM. It's just a straight count of how many tasks are late. Test number 12. I know I've been talking a little fast, but for this one, I'm going to slow down, because if you're going to listen to any test, anything I'm going to talk to today, drop the iPhone, put the BlackBerry down, and listen to this one. So the critical path test, and for this, we're going to assume that there is, for this example that I'm going to say, we're going to assume that there's no float on your critical path. So the concept is, you take an element that's on the critical path, either today or maybe a little bit in the future, and you cause a delay of 600 days. If your schedule doesn't move out by 600 days, you have a problem with the integrity of your schedule. this test is really good, and this test is also one of the tests that the DCMA kept on their revised schedule assessment, because it's like a test of tests. I've seen schedules where I've done this. I added 600 days, and the final milestone did not move out. Like, think about it. You're pushing your schedule out by, you know, roughly 3 years if you just look at the work days. And if your milestone doesn't move out at the end, you know you don't have integrity, and you definitely don't have credibility, right? So this test is very, very important. 13, the critical path. With that one we can jump. The baseline execution, that's also a count. That's a very analytic one. We can skip to that because I got other stuff I want to show you guys. So some scheduling resources. So the top one is the NDIA, the National Defense Industrial Alliance Planning and Scheduling Excellent Guide, which we call the PASEG. Actually, in 2019, they went to Rev 4. I'd say most of the changes are mostly administrative in nature. It is by far my most preferred scheduling go-to document. Actually, on the NDIA website, on the link that's there are many resources. They have a document that's just about schedule, like what kind of metrics you guys can look at. There's like 250 pages of just different kinds of metrics to look at. So really good. In general, that's a really good website, and that specific planning and scheduling guidance document is by far my favorite. It is a bit of a hard read. It's very technical, but it's very good. The US the GAO document, it's an easier read, but not as technical. The NASA one's good, and the US DoD one, it is good. Oh yeah, so that's another one. The last one at the bottom, that is the did in which a schedule needs to be delivered. And I'm happy we have such a big D&D audience, because I wanted to get this through. When certain projects when certain criteria are met in the US, I think the criteria are if you are a project that is time-based or there's a cost incentive and there's a significant amount of development effort, you are producing your schedule to this did, all of them. So last time I checked, DoD has over 500 projects, all reporting the schedules in the exact same fashion. A lot of value to an organization. So if you're an organization who contracts a lot of your work, having a standardized did, thumbs up. It has a lot of benefits, allows, drives efficiency. And I'm going to break one of the cardinal rules of presentation where you shouldn't read off a screen, but there's a text here from the NDIA PASEG that I believe is really important, and we're going to read through it. So at all costs, avoid the unenviable position of trying to defend a poorly constructed schedule. Just don't do that, right? Realize that a poorly constructed schedule is a program management problem. It's not the problem of the person building the schedule. A poorly constructed schedule is a result. It is not a cause. A schedule in this condition is due to poor scheduling management practices and processes. Once you recognize that cannot be fixed when there's an absence of stringent schedule management practices, processes, and when there is no ownership and accountability for scheduled data. Address that cause and the schedule will improve. So that document is about 300 pages, and if you're in a leadership position, this text should make you want to read at least section 3 that has to do with leadership, buy-in, and commitment. It basically goes to show why the schedule is the driving force behind the project. And this is my favorite passage of all in that document. And in that document, they talk about the DCMA 14 point. But what I get from here is, if you're receiving a schedule that's poorly constructed, It means, and you can't get the organization to do better. It's not going to be a project control officer to project control officer situation. It means, you need to get management, higher management from both levels to have a discussion. What can we do to fix this? All right, so in conclusion, the DCMA test is meant to drive schedule transparency and logic. It enables the use of scheduling best practice. It is a catalyst. That's really the key point. It's a catalyst to drive proactive discussions. It's not meant to use pass or fail and to slap have bad contractual implications, although you could dependingly, but it's more to understand the why. Why is my schedule not as good as it could be, right? It does not validate resource allocation. It does not validate resource estimates. So that's something to really take into account. The critical path test is the test that's going to give you the best bang for your buck. By doing that, you'll be able to do a full schedule risk and assessment, which includes running Monte Carlo simulations and 3-point estimates. And there's also many other metrics to consider. So, I'm sure you guys all know who Warren Buffett is. My favorite quote from this guy is, in looking for people to hire, we look for 3 qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first, the other 2 will kill you. I say this, same thing applies to schedule. If your schedule doesn't have integrity, it's, as a PM, it will drive you mad. Same thing if you're a cost analyst. Trying to figure out the relationship between time and cost is going to be very difficult if you don't have a schedule that has integrity, and after that, verify its credibility. So on that, thank you very much, and we will take some time for some questions.
Yes, indeed, and we do have a few folks waiting to ask their questions. I'm going to start with John. Let me unmute you here, John. All right, we're ready when you are.
Yeah, my question was about the resource loaded schedules. It looks like you may have answered this one. You talked about the DID,
Yep.
but do you require, as an agency from your bidders, resource loaded schedules beyond what the US DoD does?
No, right. I think so. Right now, D&D doesn't have a standardized DID. It's pretty much from project to project, but I do highly encourage so I work for the Director of the Project Management Support Organization, and whenever I get called in to support, to do requirement support, I always stress the importance of asking for it. To me, it's very important to have it. But to answer your question, no, we don't formally ask it as an organization yet.
Okay. Then next up we have Eric. And Eric is here. Eric, we're ready when you are.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yes, you can.
Sorry. So my question is similar to the first, but internally to a department, so National Defense, ADM MAT, and Department of the major Crown projects, are they going to use this in the future as a prerequisite to validating schedules and testing for integrity and
Credibility?
credibility? Yes, integrity
So,
and credibility.
if I was the one making decisions, I would make it mandatory with every schedule submission. That's not up to me. That's not up to me. But it is something that I do recommend. And one of the things I think also a lot of industry, the scheduling tools that they have it's baked into the tool. And if they're using it's not baked into MSP per se, but there are many third-party bolt-ons for MSP that can run this for you. And we have someone in DPMSO. They've built an MSP template where it will do the test for you. It's not as streamline like as having a dedicated tool, a risk tool. We are working on getting a tool that would allow us to do this with a click of the button. We're there, but we're not there yet. We got funding to get the tool, but we don't have it yet. But my advice to you is you can email me, and definitely don't be shy. Don't be shy to ask for it, especially if one of your contractors is like a Lockheed, a Boeing, you know, any of the big U.S. players. This should not be foreign to them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Excellent.
Thank you. And we have Keith, who's got 2 questions. Here we are. Keith, we're ready when you are. Okay, maybe Keith doesn't have a mic. I will start by asking his first question, which was...
I'm sorry, I asked my question to myself, I guess. So the question was, can you tell us how frequently D&D is expecting contractors to submit or report their scheduled DCMA measures?
So right now it's not a requirement, but when I give my recommendation is that it should come with every schedule submission.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question. If the schedule you receive from a contractor doesn't appear to be credible, what would you suggest the first steps are to encourage the contractor to submit better quality schedules?
So in an ideal world where D&D would, you know, assuming we have a tool to run a Monte Carlo, I would run it through the Monte Carlo to see what kind of outcome we would get. But I think if the contractor doesn't, it's probably education, working with them, trying to, you know, and trying to show them why there's value in doing it. And also telling the contractor, we're not expecting them to adhere to it. You know, if some of the tests say 5% and they come up with a 6%, okay, you know, it doesn't have to be a hard, to meet those, the values hard, but there should be a will to want to meet it, right? And I think the way to do that is maybe through the aspect of joint governance, senior leadership, and saying, you know, if your schedule isn't robust enough for the to do test number 12, the critical path test, how am I supposed to trust you at face value? I don't have the capacity to go to my seniors and say, I have proper oversight on this, that I trust your schedule. And I would like to think that the D&D partners out there are going to want to fix that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. And next up we have Kathleen. Let me see. Let me get you up here, Kathleen. Sorry, this is my fault. There she is. Kathleen, we're ready when you are. Kathleen? All right, well, we'll start with her first question. Is the project schedule or first project scheduler a full-time position for a complex D&D project?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is the project scheduler a full-time position for a complex D&D project?
I would think so, yes, for a large and complex procurement, because you will be taking in not only the contractor's schedule, but you also need to be taking into account larger things like, you know, the D&D scheduling, not the scheduling, the training portion, if there's an infrastructure project that's dependent on it. So there's probably a lot more to encompass to it. Maybe not so at the beginning, but definitely when the project starts to rev up, I would think that it is. And on the projects, the big projects that I've given support on, I believe the planner, the scheduler, has always been a full-time position.
Okay, and then the second question is, should the 3-point estimate include known project risks?
Yes, that's actually the whole purpose of the 3-point estimate. So the the 3-point estimate is you go into your schedule, and for clarity on that, that's actually a good question. You just don't run the 3-point estimate, assuming you have a tool at your fingertips. You just don't put risks on the critical path. You can literally put risks across the entire schedule, and then you get much better value out of your 3-point estimate, right? So you put your worst case, your optimistic, and your most likely, and that's how you know. Well, we think PDR is going to be delayed by, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months. What does that do to us, right? Or you got to bake those in, and that's how you get the most out of your 3-point estimate.
A nice, decisive answer, I'd say, to close things out with. At 12:59, let's keep everybody else on schedule and call it a day. I want to thank Jonathan for presenting for us today and everyone for coming out. We will have the presentation and the recording of today's webinar up on the ICEAonline.com/DLS website as of probably around lunchtime tomorrow. So we look forward to that. We don't have any webinar Wednesdays scheduled for the next few weeks, but ICEA is planning a joint effort with SCAF, the cost estimating group out in the UK, and those are going to be on Tuesdays coming up. So check in to see what we've got coming for you there. Jonathan, do you have any final words?
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for taking the time to listen to my presentation. For those of you who are within DND, the presentation will be made available on the website, I believe Megan told me, and you can reach out to me if you have any questions. And hopefully the presentation proved useful to all of you.
Awesome. Thank you everybody. Be good to each other, be good to yourselves, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.